all these schools, Ross, have lawyers and anybody, all hands on deck, trying to figure out ways, whether it's to get out of the grant of rights or reach out to other conferences to see what, the interest level is. Like, what sort of dominoes, if you're like a Florida State fan, like need to fall? Because I think Florida State would love to be in the SEC, just a hunch. But like, what sort of dominoes do you think have to fall in the next 2 or 3 years that opens expansion back up for conferences like the SEC and like the Big Ten? I mean, I listened to you on your other podcast, and you were talking about the Pac-12 was so ready to expand, but then maybe the more you think about it and you start adding more heads to the table, your pie gets a little bit smaller, as you said. So, I mean, Florida State, Clemson, do they bring enough to where this seems appealing to the SEC? If a couple more dominoes fall, you think out there?
Yeah, I think that with what Clemson and Florida State and the Miami's need, um, is obviously as you mentioned, like an invitation to the Big Ten or the SEC. They need that door to open, and in order for that door to open, you do need another wave of dominoes in realignment, and that probably starts out west. And in that story when ACC meetings got cranked up, when we dropped that story about the seven, like well, a big part of that story was the dominoes that could be set off uh, in the Pac-12, depending on the Pac-12 situation. And here we are, right, July 6th, and we still don't know about the Pac-12's long-term viability because they haven't announced or signed the media rights deal. So if and I think two things could happen here, right? They can sign a good deal or good enough for their members, and they all stay together, and that's they move on, and the deal is probably short. It's probably 5, 6, maybe at most 7 years, and so for at least those amount of years, things are stable. Option two is chaos. Is a deal, and this would be what the ACC's group needs to happen. Is option two, and that is the Pac-12 not getting a good enough TV deal, 2 to 4 teams breaking away and joining the Big 12, the Big 10, looking at teams like Washington and Oregon, for instance, just kind of sitting out there. And at that point, they'd be fairly desperate. And you wonder if they'd take a partial share to join the Big 10. And you wonder if the Big 10 would open that door. From that point, then you have the more domino situation happening, where if the Big 10 grows, whoop, the SEC might look to grow as well. The problem, of course, with the ACC schools like that we're discussing is that grant of rights. However, I think in places like Tallahassee and in places like Clemson, I think they're um, I think they're in I don't want to say panic, but a somewhat desperate situation where they would or might challenge it if those dominoes do happen. But they do need a lot to happen, because I think the Big Ten and I think the SEC right now is pretty content with the teams they have. I don't think they really want to reopen the door to expansion.
I've been telling people, Ross. I think Florida State's best entry into the SEC, kind of touching on what you just said, is goes through the Big Ten. I think the SEC already has the state school in Florida, a big one.
Correct.
The Big
Hmm.
Ten does not. And the Big Ten has won one national championship. What have we said in 20 years? Bringing Florida State and Clemson, or the threat of bringing Florida State to Clemson to the Big Ten, might get the SEC's wheels turning. Like, no, no, no. If Florida State and Clemson and Miami join the Big Ten, well, all of a sudden, buddy, we're equals. Like, the Big Ten's as good as the SEC almost. You're talking about huge national powers in one conference with Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, Clemson, like you said, Washington and Oregon. So do you think that might be the way it becomes competitive between the SEC and the Big Ten, where Florida State and Clemson land?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. They for the SEC to open its door, yeah, the Big Ten would have to show interest, or they'd have to expand in some way. I do think that is the case. Um, you know, and you're right. You nailed it. And I wrote about that in that story in mid-May. As I look, I know Florida State and Clemson both feel like SEC
Sure.
teams and schools. However, for the SEC, they don't offer as much benefits or value as teams like or schools like North Carolina and maybe even Virginia, who are located in states that the SEC doesn't have a school, and that's important for. And it gets kind of complicated, but having a foothold in a state does produce more shares for you in these media contracts, and so the SEC already has the Florida share. They already have the South Carolina share. What they don't have is North Carolina and Virginia, and of course the Big
Right.
Ten doesn't have any of it. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that you could see down the line here, a Big Ten SEC race for some of these schools if the ACC doesn't somehow find additional revenue and make everybody content.
We try to be as objective as we can on this show. I mean, I'm an alum. Corey's covered the program for a long time. But is the national appeal of Florida State, does that supersede, the Virginia market, the North Carolina, Charlotte television market, you think, Ross? I mean, does Florida State's brand still carry as far as, most Florida State fans think it does, you feel, in these circles that are, being talked about?
I think that winning helps, right? So there seem to be in football specifically, and the media rights deals have gotten to the point where many of them are, they used to be like football was 75 to 80% of a media rights deal. Now it's more like 90 to 95%. So football is of the utmost importance, and winning at football is of the utmost importance. So Florida State needs to start consistently winning at football, and it seems like they're on that track. It does, so I think that's the best way to do it. That's the driver to do it. Is sustained success, and we've seen that out of Clemson. The issue, from Clemson side is are you one personnel move from not having that anymore with Dabo, or when he leaves or whatever, it does Clemson still win at the rate that we've seen? And I think other conferences think about those things. What's the sustained success of the program in general, historically, their resources, their value. But winning at football is the way to do that.